Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Book Club Preview. I'm Michael, and today we're looking at Chapter 11 of The Maze Runner. Now, in this chapter, it starts right after Ben and Thomas meet and start fighting. And we see that it's Ben. It's this boy that Thomas had seen before in the MedJack hospital kind of room or whatever. And Ben is looking at Thomas, and somehow he has a knife. We didn't see the knife before, but he has a knife now. And Thomas is really, really scared. And Ben is just crouched down, ready to spring out and start attacking him. When suddenly Albie comes into the picture, and Albie says, "Look, Ben, you need to stop right now." I don't know, I imagine Albie with a deep voice. And I thought Ben was just crazy, but Ben starts talking. And he says, "Don't kill me, kill that guy. That guy's the bad guy. I saw him." And Albie doesn't care. He just says, "Hey, we will find out who's the bad guy, who's the good guy, but I need you to stop." And then Ben starts to say, he wants to take us home, pointing to Thomas. He wants to take us out of the maze, and he wants to do something. Albie doesn't care. Says, not Thomas, Ben, you need to drop the knife and calm down. Go back to the shack by the time I count to 3. And Ben doesn't really hear him. He just starts to kind of, bad guy, bad, he's bad, he's the bad guy. Just kind of going to this crazy episode. And at first, maybe it's okay, it's not too bad, he's just kind of talking to himself. But then Ben gets this smile. And that's not a good sign. He gets this crazy smile. And he's like, you're the bad guy. And he jumps out. And the whole time Albie's counting. 1, Ben starts saying weird things. 2, Ben starts saying weird things. Ben jumps towards Thomas, and Albie says 3. And the arrow goes right into Ben's head. Oh man. Thomas is like, "What?" But he's not that shocked. He actually looks at Ben, and he sees the arrow in his head, and he kind of thinks it's weird. He's a little bit distant from the situation, maybe because the adrenaline. And he's like, "Oh," in his mind, "there's less blood than I thought there'd be." And he remembers hearing the sound of the arrow go. And at this moment, he doesn't really like cry or throw up or freak out. But Albie says, "Let's go back." And Albie just disappears. Thomas follows Albie out of the forest. And when he gets out of the forest, he just thinks about what happened. And he thinks about the sound and the arrow and the picture of the image with the blood. He goes, "Blah, blah," and he just starts throwing up. And while he's throwing up and he's wondering, will this ever stop? His brain is like, okay, I've been here 24 hours. Surely things will get better. That's a... Never mind. I don't want to say anything. Well, he goes back and suddenly it jumps to nighttime. He's trying to go to sleep. And Chuck will not leave Thomas alone. He's like, "Hey man, say something." And Chuck says no. Thomas says no. Chuck says, "Hey man, say something." Thomas says no. And finally, for the 5th time, which we see in the book, Chuck says, "Say something. Everyone knows what happened. Sometimes it happens. Don't worry, you're not special." And that part, "you're not special," is kind of a little joke to maybe make Thomas smirk or laugh a little bit. But Thomas just he's like, "Oh my goodness, I'm gonna kill Chuck right now if he doesn't shut up." And he pretty much tells Chuck the same thing. And so Chuck finally just falls asleep. Thomas tries to fall asleep and he can't because he just keeps thinking about Ben and everything he said and the arrow and the sound, and finally he gets to sleep. But he is completely exhausted the next day. And the next day, he has to get ready for training. Chuck kind of pulls him out of bed, pulls him to the shower, pulls him to breakfast, and Thomas is just like, he doesn't really remember any of it. Until finally, he's at the slicer butcher area with the cows and everything, and he's with Newt, and Newt is kind of explaining like, hey, this is what you're gonna do today, this is the job, blah blah blah. And Thomas can't really hear him because he's thinking too much, and Newt's like, hey man, are you all right? And Thomas like, man, I couldn't sleep, I don't know what's going on. And Newt is kind of like, hey look, we get it, like that's some pretty intense stuff that you just had to deal with, but you have to keep your mind off of it, keep busy, and keep working. And that's why everyone works so hard during the day, because if we're working, we're not getting depressed. And so Thomas decides, yeah, let me get to work, and he starts getting ready to be a slicer, or training to be a slicer. But before he goes, he asks Newt, he's like, hey, how's the girl? Any update? And there's not. She's just been in a coma still, sleeping. The two med jacks have been like giving her soup in her mouth, and she's just been falling down her throat, I guess. And Thomas still feels there's something important about this girl, but because of the thing that happened with Ben, he can't really focus on it that much. So Thomas is trying to be a slicer. He's feeding animals, he's shoveling poop, he's doing everything, and towards the end, it's time to practice killing something. And there's one boy, I can't remember his name, but he has pimples all over his face. He looks a little strong, a little short, and this guy also looks a little crazy, like maybe he enjoys killing too much. And so he's just cutting up animals and like slicing out parts and putting them in different places so that way they could eat them later for dinner. And this guy looks like he's just having a great time. Like, it's so fun. Thomas is like, not enjoying it. And when he leaves to go have lunch or dinner, the boy says, oh, go ahead and go without me. I'm going to stay here and finish up, because he's just enjoying himself too much. And Thomas is like, man, I am never going to be a slicer, and I am never going to eat anything from a pig anymore. As he's going to the kitchen or the shack or wherever people eat, from the west gate, I believe, he sees a runner coming. Whoa, what? This is a little early. Usually runners don't come back this early. And this guy's all alone. He looks tired. And so Thomas is like, man, I'm going to go talk to this guy and get some answers and ask him some questions. As he's walking over to the guy, he's getting ready to start talking to him, and suddenly the runner just stops and boom, falls to the ground. No idea what happened, but that is what we'll find out in chapter 12. Well, vocabulary. There are a bunch of vocabulary words. The first one, bloodshot. Ben's eyes were bloodshot. That's when you can kind of see the red coming around your eye. Sometimes if you're sick or if someone like pokes you in the eye, your eye will get red. But for Ben, his eyes are just red, full of blood. We call it bloodshot. Involuntary. Involuntary means you didn't control it. It wasn't your choice. So as he's looking at Ben and Ben's talking, Thomas steps backward. It wasn't a thought, oh man, this is dangerous, I should step backwards. His body just senses the danger and just steps backwards without his control. Involuntary. Imagine this is a leg. If you go to a doctor, sometimes a doctor will hit your knee and your leg will kick. This is a involuntary reaction. You don't control it. Your leg just does it. Scrawny, maybe I would be considered scrawny. Someone with no muscles and no fat and just bones. Scrawny individual. And Ben looks like he hasn't eaten probably in a long time, and he's been sick, and his body is probably scrawny. Mesmerized. Thomas could have ran away, but looking at Ben and looking at how crazy the situation was and how scary it was, he was just stuck looking. He was mesmerized. His focus was completely on this one thing, and he couldn't think about anything else. If you think about looking for something that I could use, some hypnotist, and they have like a watch, and they say, look into the watch, 1, 2, and you witch it, and you become mesmerized. Your whole focus is on that one thing. Retching means throwing up. That action is retching. Lunacy means crazy. Lunatic, we can also say someone is crazy. Lunacy is having craziness. Intolerable means you can't stand it. You can't bear it. You can't you can't tolerate. Tolerate means you can do something. Let's imagine here we go. Here's a little red pen. Let's imagine this is a pepper, and oh, it's spicy, but I can eat it. I can tolerate it. Maybe I have another pepper. I start spitting it out. It is intolerable. I don't have enough power or strength to keep it or to bear it, and I spit it out. Intolerable. Mopey is like sad. When Thomas wakes up in the morning and he's waking up and going to the shower and eating breakfast, he's like, yeah, okay, let's go. I don't want to. This kind of moping about. He's not energetic, he's feeling sad, or not very emotional, and moving very slow. Mopey. Bug and ringer. Ringer means like in boxing, right? You are in a ring, and at the end of a boxing round, you're like, oh, I'm the champion, but your head's like because you were in this ring fighting. And so when we talk about someone being a little drained from some stress, we can kind of say like, oh man, you really had a ringer yesterday. You really had a battle or a fight or some really crazy event like boxing. And bugging or bugging is what he's saying here, just means like really or very or a terrible ordeal, terrible fight. Victuals or victuals, that are like pieces of food, things you make food with, rations, things like that. And so the slicer boy, is chopping the food and spreading out the pieces that they're gonna eat and be able to eat. Oh, that was the last one. So my discussion question for you is, do you think Ben was crazy, or do you think Thomas is actually a bad guy? And okay, Thomas is the main character. We like Thomas, right? He's okay. I like Newt more, But Thomas is pretty cool, and I like Chuck a lot too. But Gally doesn't like Thomas, and he says, "I remember you. I think you're bad," something like that. And then Ben is going crazy, and he's saying Thomas is bad. Well, I don't want to believe it, and certainly Albie, I guess, doesn't believe it. But what do you think? Could there be some truth, or is Ben just crazy, and maybe Gally's just a jerk? We don't know. But this is something that Thomas is wondering, like, yeah, what is going on? What do you think? Of course, please make your own discussion question. All right. That's all the time that we have for today. Thank you so much for joining me for this episode of Book Club Preview. I'll see you soon. Bye-bye. Hey, if you have any questions about the video today, please feel free to leave a comment in the comment section. If you had any other vocabulary words that you wanted to know what they meant, let me know. And also, if you're interested in maybe joining one of these book clubs, please leave a comment and I'll get back to you. Thank you so much for watching. Bye-bye.